All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Sisters for Harmony podcast. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Kathleen Walls. I am joined by my co hosts, Brother Ed Umoja Herman and Ruby Burke. And we are super excited because it is May. It is Mental Health Awareness Month. And because of that, we have two very phenomenal and special guests joining us tonight. We have Dr. Natasha Ramontal, who many of you are familiar with from medical tourism. She's going to be talking about maternal mental health. And then we have the infamous Dr. George James. And we're going to be talking about mental health in all of its forms, and especially around male mental health and Black male mental health. So, welcome, welcome, welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you here. I'm gonna pass the mic to Ruby to say her intros, and then I'm gonna pass the mic to Brother Emoji so he can open us up as he always does. So, Ruby, I'm passing it to you.
Okay, welcome to both of you. I have my questions ready. Dr. Walls always says, make sure you have a pen and paper. I
That's right.
do. But I'll say welcome and thank you for joining us. Brother Emoja.
Um, so greeting. I'd like to greet everyone in the name of God and our ancestors and whose footsteps I most humbly walk. We most humbly walk. Is welcome you to Sisters for Harmony with the President, Dr. Walls, and the Vice President, Miss Ruby Burke. So welcome one and all.
All right, thank you. You know, Brother Mojo, one of the things that you have always talked about when you started Sisters in Harmony, our first nonprofit, before we converted over or transformed over into Sisters for Harmony, you talked about speaking to the women first. And you felt as though it was important to gather the women first. And you would say, after the women, who came next?
The children
And then after the children came,
came the men.
and what was the philosophy behind that?
Well, my philosophy, he's trying to get me in trouble already. The reason I did that is if you look around first, women network generally, they network better than men. That's why the malls have more stores for women than men.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you go to the mall, there has more stores for women because a woman will go to a store, see something on sale, and buy it for her girlfriend. We guys, we'll go to the store, we see something on sale, and we'll get back home, and we might call our brothers and say, "Yo, man, you know that thing we were talking about was on sale." So women have that nature inside of them, that there's to nurture stuff inside of them. So I felt in Harmony, if we got the women together, that was a very powerful base roots for us. And then we know usually wherever women go, they bring the children with them. Usually,
Mm-hmm.
they bring the children with them. They always bring. You'll see women carrying the children around, pulling the daughters or the sons behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, the men. A lot of times when men see women somewhere, they're going to follow. And then if they see their wives and their children, they're going to say, "Hey, what are they doing over there? Let's go see what they're doing." And then wherever there's a gathering of women and children, men are like pretty much automatically find themselves following that energy to see what the women are doing. So that was
Mm-hmm.
my philosophy to get the organization going. Let's go after the women who bring the children, and then that will entice the men to come.
Okay. And one of the things that I know you've talked about, Dr. Gordon has talked about, is that in order for us to have balance in our lives and in the world, we must make sure that we are incorporating the men. It's not all women, it's not all men, it is the full spectrum. And that's why it was funny when I was talking with George the other day. I said, we got to talk about men's mental health. Like, yes, it is Sisters for Harmony. Yes, it is about empowering the next generation of women, but we cannot do that without the help of the men and making sure y'all are mentally on point because we need we need to all be mentally healthy and well. So with that being said, George, I'm gonna pull you up first, and then Dr. Ramantal, I'm gonna pull you in next. Tell us about your just introduce yourself to the audience for those who do not know you. Many of you have seen him on the Today Show, Good Morning America, all types of places. But George, go on and tell them about yourself.
Well, I'm I'm glad to be here. Thank you all for the opportunity to be in the conversation. As was mentioned, my name is Dr. George James. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist as well as executive coach. I've been fortunate to consult and speak in lots of different places. I love also being able to host great events for couples. And I've been fortunate to take my work in lots of spaces, including on air in lots of media places or radio, really just trying to help people know that mental health and mental wellness is possible for us all. And that, working with athletes, entertainers, leaders, executives has also been a part of my passion. So grateful to be able to do that and excited about the topic because, yeah, men and then men of color and then Black men, the conversation around mental health is really important for those men.
And let's go into Caribbean men too.
Yeah, it's a whole that's a whole
Hey,
subculture.
Different show.
Would you say that's a whole nother show? Look,
Different show.
Yes, yes.
oh Lord.
They're not ready for that.
No, 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 no. Please no.
I'm
This
going to say, bring it. We're ready.
we'll throw her a pepper pot and some ackee and saltfish.
There you go.
All right. And Dr. Ramontal, for you, why is this topic important for you? And I know you're going to focus more on maternal health, mental health, but of course you can go in all directions. But why is this topic important for you?
Well, I think just being a Black woman and maternal mental health is important, I think, on a whole, but specifically because Black maternal health rates in the U.S. are so deplorable. And what I'm getting a lot of questions about, at least on my channel pertaining to medical tourism, is where can I go to have my baby safely, or where can I go to conceive safely? And that's a whole other thing, because the conception is more about affordability, but it is also about implicit bias with clinicians here in the U.S. and structural racism. Those that are going for IVF, at least Blacks and Asians, there's evidence-based information showing that they tend to get referred for IVF 2 years later, generally, than their white counterparts. So the conversations are not being had. It needs to be brought to light. And because of this, more women are becoming a little bit more, they're becoming advocates for themselves and actually seeking health elsewhere. So that's where it comes in for me in terms of bringing a little bit more light on which countries have the safest maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates.
George, I see your mind going. What you thinking?
No, I just think it's really amazing. One, I fully agree that there's so many studies, especially medically, that talks about how women of color and Black women are mistreated for the same diagnoses or same symptoms. And so, to hear that what Dr. Ramontal just shared was new but not surprising. So that's what I was thinking about. And how unfortunate it is that what we have to do in terms of, to conceive and have and care for our children and what it means for families.
Yeah. It's incredible because when you stop and you think about the history of people of color and specifically Black people within the United States. And, there's been a lot more talk, obviously, since the murder of George Floyd around systemic racism and really looking at the origins of the disparity in treatment over the years and how it's still so perpetuated this day, right? The embeddedness within the system and people now saying, wait a minute, I don't have to stay in unhealthy situations. I don't have to stay in a system to receive services that I need that are not being done to the best of my ability, right? That's done for me. And this is so important. And Dr. Ramontal, this is what makes your work so unique because you're opening up the world and saying, look, there are other places that you have a right to go to in order to be treated to the best that you can be treated. So,
Absolutely.
what are some, well, if you have something you want to say in response to that, please go ahead. And any additional information you want to offer the audience.
Yeah, no, I think I just want to share a little bit about the background of why Maternal Mental Health Day even came about. It's not
Mm-hmm.
specific to Black women, but there is a portion, at least in the US, that I wanted to share that is specific to Black women simply because they know the numbers look bad and there's not much being done about it. I have my own theories on that, but that's another thing. But but the first Wednesday of May is World Maternal Mental Health Day. So that was celebrated yesterday. And
Mm-hmm.
organizations from around the world, including the US, Canada, UK, South Africa, Nigeria, Argentina, and so many more, they're actually leading efforts to raise awareness about maternal mental health through a collective like social media push and also with some in-country events. So
Mm-hmm.
Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week, it's a week-long campaign that's dedicated to talking about mental health problems before, during, and after pregnancy. And that week is all about raising public and professional awareness of perinatal mental health problems,
Mm-hmm.
advocating for women and families impacted. And I think it's appropriate that you have myself and also having Dr. James on as well, because we need allyship.
Yes.
That's important. Yeah, we're talking about the women, but we're connected to so many men, and just supporters. It's important. So you'll see social media campaigns with the hashtag maternal MH matters, MH for
Mm.
mental health, on social media, like formerly Twitter, X, and things like that. But there's also a call to the UN to recognize World Maternal Mental Health Day. It's
Oh,
really
wow.
important. So where health advocates, researchers, academics, clinicians, and just people with their own lived experiences, they're committed to improving mental health support for women, throughout the pregnancy stages, because
Mm-hmm.
as many as 1 in 5 new mothers and 1 in 10 new dads experience some type of perinatal mood and anxiety disorder in many countries. But
Mm-hmm.
the issue is that over 75% of the women do not get diagnosed. And so they
Mm-hmm.
don't receive adequate treatment or support. And
Wow.
that's where this entire thing came about, to hopefully raise awareness and spread the campaign and support and provide support to hopefully, one, reduce stigma as well, because it's a stigma
Mm-hmm.
not only in the US, but globally about mental illness. And then two, provide any type of apps or other information to help support someone find care so that they know they're not alone in this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. George, anything you want to chime in with?
No, I'm once again new knowledge, but once again not surprising, and it's really great that we're doing that. And I think, like, when we talk about May and mental health awareness, there's been also a really big push to really talk about Black mental health and what that
Yes.
means. And I think, like, with this conversation that we're having today, what does that really mean to highlight and aware and to have these conversations in our families, so that it's not new knowledge, so that it is something that is common and that we share and support. And in particular, to even what you'll probably talk more about, like how are we allies, right, for the cause? How are men kind of taking up this conversation and speaking more about it, and how are we advocating for our own
Mm-hmm.
wellness? And
Mm-hmm.
even just recently, my wife and I hosted a date night event, and our theme for this last one was really talking about love, sex, and health, and
Mm-hmm.
really the intersection of those things, and how sometimes in our relationships we're not talking about health things like our mental health, our emotional health with our spouses and partners. And so,
Mm-hmm.
to what was just said, it just made me think about, like, yeah, we need to be having these conversations a lot more,
Yeah.
and that's what's needed.
George, tell the audience a little bit about the events that you and your wife host, and let's not sleep. Your wife is a powerhouse in her own right as
Yes, she
well.
is.
So give her a little bit, give her some big up, and then talk about y'all events.
Oh, I have no problem giving her some big ups, some
Okay.
props. My wife, Dr. Candace Robertson James, is an amazing, wonderful, beautiful, brilliant woman. and glad that our lives have intersected and been connected. She's actually the director of the master's and undergraduate public health programs at LaSalle University, as well as chair of the public health and nutrition department. And we have been uh, able to partner together to host different events. And this past Friday, we hosted our couples event, which we call Date Night Redo. It was a idea, a vision that I had some years ago about giving couples an immersive experience that is more edutainment. They'll be entertained, but also learn and have live skits from actors, talks that my wife and I give, live music by a band and singer, just a beautiful ambiance at a mansion. And so just
Mhm.
allowing couples to say it's okay to go out and date and it's okay to have a good time with each other. And it's a good time. It's okay to learn.
Mhm.
And we also followed up with my wife, who does a lot of work for with mothers who are just overwhelmed. And so she hosted a mother-daughter event just to give moms and daughters opportunity just to bond and connect with each other. So
Nice.
just grateful for the opportunities for us to try to be of impact to others.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. I love it. Ruby, I know you have a list of questions over there. Anything that you want to chime in and ask
Um,
our guests at the moment?
I do. Dr. Ramontal, when you deal with women after they've had children and they're going through different emotions in reference to being able to deal with these children or with these infants and things like that, I know that sometimes that's a mental thing that's going on with them. What tools do you use to help them? And before you answer, um, Dr. James, I want you to think about what tools you would use to say to the men. Okay,
So
Dr.
just
Romantel.
no, thank you for the question. So I am a doctoral trained nurse, but I am not I'm not a clinician that's specific to psychology or
Yes.
psychiatry. And I do want to make that clear
Mhm.
distinction. I'm emergency department and I've worked post anesthesia care unit. Now, I have had several Black women and women of color come through the emergency department, obviously overwhelmed, many lacking any prenatal care. And then some who are trying to get pregnant have gone through miscarriages or are actively going through a miscarriage where I'm treating.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
in those cases, I have been trained enough to go through some motivational interviewing, which is mostly
Mhm.
listening and have them vocalize whatever it is they're feeling. Because a lot of times, what we're finding, at least from those who are asking me about maternal tourism, is that they're leaving because they feel unheard, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
By their clinicians. They're saying, I
Mhm.
feel something or I'm going through something, and it's passed off as something like, oh, well, you're pregnant. Everything's different. And they're
Mhm.
saying, no, 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 I do feel like something is wrong. So we have
Mhm.
that scenario. And we also have scenarios where someone may be trying to conceive, and it's an issue where um, certain routes of treatment are not recommended to them because maybe someone makes an assumption that they cannot afford it.
Mhm.
Rather than giving them all of the options,
And make their
they
choice.
just make their come to their own conclusions. So a lot of that has to do with more providing any resources that
Mhm.
or people who specialize in any of these skills. And at the time, as they're going through it, obviously case by case basis, but certainly motivational interviewing with a lot of active listening for me,
Mhm.
because I am not specialized in that particular area.
Got it. Thank you.
And if you don't mind saying tools for, if you could say it again,
In
please.
reference to their the men, if they find that, because I have a friend and she was not able to deal mentally with the infant, and her husband was just overwhelmed trying to deal with this baby and
Mhm.
the mental state of his wife.
Mhm.
So what would you say? What tools would you give in reference to what they can do?
Yeah, I'm going to make a statement that's probably not fair to probably Ed and some other men who might say that's not me. Uh, but I think a lot of men have not been used to really carrying an equal share of the responsibilities. So like what should happen at the house, right? Who isn't responsible for childcare? That usually it leans one way or the other. I'm not saying it's a 90-10 split, but it's usually not necessarily 50-50 or even 55-45. And so as a result, I think some men are not aware of, hey, my spouse, my partner is off or is dealing with stuff. Or by the time we realize it's a little further in the process. So for myself, even, right, I remember like early in the pandemic, like my wife was overwhelmed and stressed. She was doing a lot. There was a lot that she, as an administrator, was being pulled on to do. And it took me a little bit to realize, oh, she's stressed, and that means I need to pick up the slack. I need to do more. I need to take less off of her, or take some things off of her plate. And I think in that situation, sometimes with a child, a newborn, or postpartum, or other challenges, it's really being in tune with your spouse and partner to be able to say, what can I do to support? How can I ask certain questions? How can we go get some help or support? And instead of reacting and not maybe even making a person feel worse. And so that would be my encouragement to a lot of men and support is like, you see something is different, say something, or maybe do something to help take the stress off of her plate, so that way maybe she can get the help that she needs.
Yeah.
Can I just piggyback on that? I think it's so great that you said that, actually, because he's a trained professional in this area. And he said it took him a little bit to even recognize that with his spouse. And I think everyone is involved in their day to day. Everyone's busy in their own way. And sometimes you have some things on your mind that you really are not in tune. And it doesn't mean you're not a good spouse. It just means you're just not in tune because you have some other things on your mind. So I think that's really interesting that you brought that to light, because I think some people feel that they need to be a trained professional to detect things like that. And, that as well as some coping mechanisms, which is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Brother
Yeah,
Moja. I know
yeah.
Go ahead, George. Go ahead, George.
I just want to say, like, yeah, I wanted to just share that, like, I'm not perfect. And just because I do this all day, every day, means like I still am human, and I have some ability to pick up on things, and it might take me an hour or 2 days, but I also miss things. And I just wanted to highlight that. But that's the important part, is that for us to really learn each other more and help and support each other, and hopefully share that load of stress, and so that we don't continue doing the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Brother Moja.
Now, listen to what you're saying. It's very interesting. It made me start to think about my sensitivity to the question and what we're talking about. When I was young, my mom gave me a lot of responsibility of helping her with my brother, my younger brother, and I had to pick him up. I had to pick him up from school, take him to daycare, pick him up from daycare. Make sure he got get the homework, get his homework going and stuff like that. Make sure he had something to eat. So that made me very sensitive to to teamwork. And so growing up like that, when my son was born, and I brought him home from the hospital. Okay, his mom had chicken pox, and so I had to bring him home from the hospital. I had to go to the hospital for a whole week to feed him. Right, so it gave me a sense of responsibility as a parent, as my hands when was needed in ways it wasn't needed before. But I think if I did not have that from my mom and stuff, I think it would have taken me a longer time to adjust to that. But because of what happened with my mom and my little brother, and then when my son came along, I knew the responsibility of taking care of this child was both of ours. There were certain things I just knew I had to do that she couldn't do. So it gave me the mindset of what else did I have to do? What do we do as teammates to make things move better? And I think because of my upbringing with my mom, I had a little bit of more sensitivity in that realm. It was something that I was used to already. Now I just had to put it to work now with my son. And just like, even when you're in relationships with people, it's like when your partner says she's tired, or when your partner says, can you stop at the store and do this? And you want to get home really quick. Can you stop at the store and do? And it's like, if she's asking for help, stop and listen. And I think that's the whole thing, communication. Just stop and listen. If you have a partner, you really love your partner, if she asking you for something, that means she needs help, because you know your partner, right? So she's opening her mouth and she's asking that she needs help.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Ramontal, I saw you shaking your head real strong on that one.
Yeah, no, I'm a firm believer in no one will know unless you speak up.
Come on,
Right?
say it again, please. Say it again.
No one will know unless you speak up. You can't look at the situation and just assume that your partner or anyone else, family members, supporters, know what you're going through, because they have their own issues as well. And we don't know. We're on the outside looking in. So unless you say something, now when you say something, if you don't get help, that's a completely different story. But they won't know unless you speak up.
Yeah. George, go ahead. Now your head going, because I know as a
Well,
marriage and
no,
family therapist, you know this story.
I was like, yes and yes. Yeah, like we're not mind readers, and I think like a lot of men will say like, well, how am I supposed to know? She didn't say anything, right? Like the start of like, we're not mind readers, but I think the challenge for a lot of guys though is that we're often not also asking, right? We're not like checking in as much as we probably should. Hey, I see that you had a busy week. All right, just once again using us as an example, I I realized over the past few years that this first few months of the year is really intense for my wife, and going away, like we like to travel, but going away from the kids is really something that she tries not to do as much. But I've learned that she needs a break during this time. Now, if it was left up to her, she's not going to take the break in May, right? She's going to do more things and be more active and so forth. But we've conveniently found some ways to take a break during this time. And I've seen her like really relax during these times, right? And so now I have to register in my mind that May is a good time for a break. It's the end of the semester. There's a little bit of time. And so sometimes we don't pay attention to these rhythms, or we're not really asking the questions, because then there's a responsibility once we hear it, once we hear some of that. And then I think we have to act. And I think that's where, I'd probably encourage a lot of men to be able to do that more.
That's really interesting that you made the point that when you ask, then you got to do something about it, because that's a reason why even just primary care physicians don't ask. They specifically don't ask about mental health things or even just social determinants of health. Are you able to afford your medication? Are you able to get a ride to your treatment? And many of them have reported it's because I am not a social service person. I am a medical school. That's outside of my realm. And if I ask it and they open up, now it's my problem. And I'm not trained to know what to do about it. So many of them go not, and they don't ask. They may know, they may sense something, but that's where a lot of nurses may come in. And a lot of times the nurses will be your advocate, and they're like, what's going on? And they tend to know a full story as if they are a family member, and they'll give the doctor the rundown. And the doctor might say, well, how'd you know that? Well, I just talked with them. I asked them these questions. I saw this was going on. So really interesting.
So I'm hearing one of the main things that we have to do is make sure that we ask. And the second thing we need to do is make sure we listen for the answer, right? And we need not to assume and clear up things, because the mental health and wellness is real. And for so long, it was really seen as either people pretending, complaining, trying to be manipulative, getting over something that was only for the wealthy. I mean, I remember being little, and it's ironic that I ended up going to school for psychology, because my mother was one who said Black folks don't go to therapists. Like I remember her saying that clearly when I was 8 years old. And so little did she know that 2, 3 years later was when I would make the decision that that's what I wanted to do with my career, And so there's a lot of people that felt that way and still feel that way. And I say one thing, when the pandemic hit, and I remember a good friend of mine asked me, um, she said, "How are you dealing with all of this?" And I said, "I've been preparing for this for 20 some years." So I knew mental health was important. Now, the fact that everybody else is waking up to its reality, as we talked about maternal mental health, the fact that your body, a woman's body, is going through all of these changes, all of these hormones, all of this, the fact that someone may be out of balance and experience things like postpartum, like anxiety, like all of these real conflicts within the relationship, because now roles have changed, expectations have changed, family structure has changed. Why we have specialists like George called a marriage and family therapist, because we need to look at all of these things and talk about these things. Yes, Dr. Wade put in Dr. Louise Wade, who is our visiting veterinarian and the veterinarian for Winco Animal Care. So if you need some animal care, check out Dr. Louise Wade. She said this is where Dr. Walls' empathy and compassion training workshop for medical professionals is so necessary. Yes, because understanding that empathy, understanding that compassion, compassion is empathy in action, right? I'm not just feeling you, I'm now feeling responsibility, as you mentioned, to do something and assist you. And so getting people to recognize that. But I want to go back, Dr. Ramontal. I know postpartum depression. What are some of the mental health pieces that people need to be mindful of when we're talking about maternal mental health?
So much of it stems around anxiety, and anxiety shows up in many different forms, and also depression, which is later stages. But the anxiety, you'll find it at different stages when it comes to a mother, whether it's maybe their history, they have tried to have children and either had difficulty getting pregnant, or they've had a number of miscarriages, or they have an experience with maybe a family member who's gone through that, or a close friend, and they kind of take that on as well. Or if it's an unexpected pregnancy, and maybe that's something that, the unplanned pregnancy, they weren't
Right.
thinking about, and they're thinking about all of the things surrounding that, whether it's finances, the relationship, whatever it may be. But a lot of it, predominantly when it comes to maternal mental health, stems from anxiety and depression.
Yeah, thank you. George, anything you want to add in that space?
Yeah, I think that we don't talk enough about anxiety and depression just overall, and definitely, for folks of color. And I've actually just been um, in, in my life and in my own family and friends, just seeing more things as like, oh, that's really just you being anxious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the thought of like even some things that are normal, like, call me when you get home. It's like you just nervous, right? And that's okay. There might be some reason behind that, but it's a form of anxiety, or you know we'll joke about this in our own home, like, put a coat on, you don't want to catch a cold, right? Where it's really just being nervous, right, that something could happen. And once again, it's not saying that it's wrong, it's just recognizing like, oh, if I can hear that as you being anxious, I don't really have to get in an argument with you. I don't really have to get in, I don't have to be defensive. I could just say, oh, that's the way you care, and it's showing up as being anxious.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Dr. James, let me ask you this. How in the world did you end up getting into therapy? You are a Black male with Caribbean roots. How did this even come to pass?
Yeah, I don't know. It's part of what the people call me, the unicorn, or one of the unicorns in this work. But I think how it happened was watching my parents, my Jamaican parents, who both were strong Christian faith, be really thoughtful and caring and compassionate to other people. Would give their last dollar so that kids can go to school in Jamaica, or would just be the one, my mom visiting folks in the hospital, So I think I saw care and compassion. And I
Mhm.
think at an early age, I wanted to be a medical doctor. And
Mhm.
it wasn't until biology hit me in the face in college that I realized, okay, this is maybe not where God is expecting me to go right now. I might need to make a pivot. As much as I was good with sciences and math, I was also very relational. I was very like, I was always the person that people wanted to talk to. And I
Mhm.
didn't realize that was just a part of my essence that I carried.
Mhm.
And I think the real pivot was being able to talk to my parents about wanting to move out of medical school track and into psychology, and realize they just didn't care. They just wanted the best for me. And
Mhm.
once I was able to accept that, then I was really able to really think about what are my gifts, what are my talents, what are my passions. And then that's what led me further. And it was in the master's program that I was like, this is where I'm supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
And all the gifts and talents and learning all started to come together, and it's been full throttle since then.
Mhm. And what made you choose marriage and family as your specialty area?
Yeah, I knew that I didn't gravitate to schizophrenia or inpatient work.
Mhm.
I like and the way I would say it then is that I really wanted to work with people who are dealing with everyday relational issues, stuff that just comes up that can
Mhm.
get in our way, and if we don't figure it out, it kind of makes us stumble. And I saw that as family life. I saw that as our own development as individuals. And
Mhm.
as I've progressed and I've, tried to use that same kind of reference into working with what do leaders go through? What do
Mhm.
entertainers and athletes go through? Some everyday stuff for them that sometimes they can't reveal to everybody, and they often might feel alone and isolated. So I think it was just really wanting to help people have a more fulfilling life,
Mhm.
to unlock some potential opportunities in their life by working through if I can get my relationship better, if I can be a better person, and maybe
Mhm.
even if I can be a better parent.
Mhm. Mhm. Ruby, what else you got on that list over there? Yours.
I think I've asked everything on my list.
You good?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
actually, things that I didn't ask, they already answered. So
Okay.
they
Okay.
already spoke on.
All right. Over on the
Yes.
Instagram side of life, Dr. James Tweedly D said, "Oh, that's good." Now I make up how people sound. So Tweedly D, if I ain't get your voice right, let me know. Look,
I'll take it.
you take it. Okay. Okay. Brother Moshe, any questions or comments that you want to share?
No, I like where the conversation is going. These are types of conversations I think that is needed more in our community,
Mhm.
especially community of color in the Caribbean.
Mhm.
Because being a Caribbean man, I know Dr. James knows what I'm talking about. These is we grew up in a place where like it's like, boy, what wrong with you, Mike? And if you sit around your friends, the adult male, they say, "Man, you need a good drink,"
Mhm.
something. It's like no one that is. Let me say, it's hardly a conversation that is had in the Caribbean circles.
Mhm.
And when that kind of topic comes up, you find that the your manhood of being a man is challenged.
Hmm.
It's like you,
Mhm.
you need to fess up to, and so in the Caribbean they have a way of making you feel, and in all communities too, but in the community they have certain words in the Caribbean that each island will use to make you feel like you're not supposed to be talking about that. You're not supposed to be feeling like that. So these
Mhm.
are conversations I think that is definitely needed more. And being from the Caribbean, I know it's a conversation that is truly needed in the Caribbean circles even more.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, if I
Dr. Dr. James, let me just tell you, people are hitting me up on text messages because they telling me they can't leave their comments in the chat. They want me to tell you thank you for your response and for being on the show this evening.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to add on to, what Brother Ed just said. Um, I think like in so many circles, but definitely in the Caribbean, it's there's a lot of hypersexuality. I mean, there's even like just what's norm of like if you where lots of people have a second family, right? Like, and it's almost like common, right? And so there's a lot of not only experiences but narrative that you got to push against. And I feel fortunate that I was either protected. I mean, not that it wasn't in my family, because I got stories, and that's a whole nother day. But the thought of, like, I think I was protected enough that it was far from me, but not but I knew the reality of it. And so I had to have moments in my life where I had to make choices. And I think going to learn to be a therapist forced me to ask questions about myself and my family that I probably wouldn't have. Right. It was my early experience with what does it mean to learn about therapy and to learn about self-awareness. And I think that has helped me to be clear about what type of man do I want to be? What type of father do I want to be? What type of husband do I want to be? Not perfect, but at least more intentional about it. And I think what happens is, for lots of folks, the momentum, the stereotype, the I'm not going to be seen as soft, or I'm not going to be seen as fill in the blank name, carries people away from being the man that they could be if they just, tried something different.
For sure. Dr. Ramontal, I know your brain is going on drive. What you got?
No, they're talking about the male Caribbean experience, and I'm thinking about the female Caribbean experience, which is quite similar, unfortunately, and like you, Dr. James, I was shielded as well. Both of my parents were very open with myself and my siblings about just talking about things. And I don't know if that had more to do with them coming to this country and seeing things that they were not accustomed to seeing. So because they kind of didn't know and were learning as they go, it was one of those things to be as open as possible with their children, because they just didn't really know the lay of the land. It was very different. A different generation, a different country, different culture, so all of that, I think, has been beneficial for myself and my siblings in terms of our relationship and openness with our parents. But we are not immune to the fact that the culture itself, there's a stigma on that. If you were even to say, I'm going to go see a counselor or a therapist, you're mad, what do you mean? So yeah, it's a thing. It is a real thing. So yeah, and the thing is, I learned also in nursing school that a lot of it in terms of mental health, behavioral health, had to do with lack of coping skills. Everyone goes through something in life, for instance, death, or the loss of a relationship, maybe divorce or something along those lines. And a lot of people were literally, or loss of a job. And those were the things that sort of puts someone over the edge. Maybe they don't have a history of mental illness, but the circumstances were brought on because their inability to cope.
So we have Light Session TV says, yes, Caribbean parents are not open with their children. All right. So y'all are hitting on spots. Mary May over, and she's a marriage and family therapist. She said, I enjoy these conversations being very, very, very real, yet very necessary. So go ahead, Dr.
when we think of it as a Caribbean man, when we come into this country, we have a choice. We could follow the norm from the Caribbean perspective, or we could say, I want to make that change. So when my son was born, I don't remember. I could count on probably one hand the amount of times I heard my mom say, I love you. And from the Caribbean side, how they don't say that like that. So when my son was born, I made a conscious decision to say to him, I love you all the time. Even now, he just turned 34 a couple of days ago. Okay. We still say, I love you on the phone when we hang the phone up. He's all the way across the country. But that came from me making that conscious decision, because I did not hear it growing up like that. And so I could have said, I'm just going to follow the norm and just do that myself. But whatever was inside of me that said, you have to make a difference. It stops here. You know, it's okay to hug your son and tell him you love him.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to cry in front of him. It's okay to tell him, Daddy, don't know. Let's find out together. Those are things and I'm not going to talk for all Caribbean men, but those are things I really didn't hear in the Caribbean community, because we had some Caribbean friends that grew up who were older than me when I was growing up. And when I said to them, I don't drink, they said, come on, man, you're a man, you could drink now. And I'm like, it got to the point where I said, I just said to them, I am a man, so I could make my own choice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you hear these things in the Caribbean community, and you hear it in other communities too, but since I'm talking from the Caribbean perspective of things, what I am, I saw that it was up to me to make the conscious decision to stop it from where I am. And I think it's something a lot of people in the Caribbean community, we just go with the flow, because we feel it's our culture, and not realizing, no, it's not our culture. It's something that we put into our culture. And if we put it in, we could take it out. And I think that's what on that point.
Yeah, you know, as you said that, it reminded me of experience I had even with my father growing up. And so I was born in the U.S., but parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, all Jamaican, born and raised in Jamaica. So I have this cultural heritage and experience. And growing up, you wouldn't tell me that that I didn't have a Jamaican experience, because everything we did in the house was Jamaican. But I also had the experience of growing up as an African American in lots of different ways in the country. And so there's this mix of things. And I remember actually seeing my cousin, seeing my dad. No, actually, it was my cousin kiss my dad, and it like messed with me, because to that point, I was like in my, I was probably in my young adulthood, maybe like, you know, high school, and I don't remember kissing my dad. And I went through a whole process of gearing myself up to say, this is going to be the day I'm going to kiss my dad. This is just a kiss on the cheek, right? Like I went through all this mental anguish to like, I'm going to kiss my dad. And I remember the day it was like, I was bringing them to the airport, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then like, I think I just rushed to kiss him, and I kissed him on the ear, and like I missed. And like, you know, like but it was all this deepness about what it means to be a man, what it means to be affectionate, to be vulnerable, that was coming out in that moment. And you fast forward now, I kiss my son like 1,000,000 times a day, right? Like my son, my daughter, like anybody, like they're like, too late. You're gonna be kissed, and I'm gonna keep kissing you, right? Because I wanted my son to have that experience, that it wasn't a like, and now I mess with him. Oh, you gotta kiss me back, because that's now the type of experience I want him to have, which is different from mine growing up.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Because so I grew up the same upbringing as you. I'm the first American-born Jamaican here. So, but my parents both are affectionate. But it's interesting because there's this Chat Caribbean People group on Facebook that I belong to, and literally yesterday, the question was, tell us how a Caribbean shows you how they love you. And everything was centered around, you want some food? You want to put on a jacket? You want, like everything but the words, I love you.
Yeah.
You know? And so someone who was American came into that chat and was like, wow, it's really interesting that a majority of the answers here center around food. You want a mango? I peel some mango for you. It's in the kitchen. It was like, I put up your food, and I was like, oh my goodness.
Go grab a plate.
A lot of people don't, but they show it because that's what they're accustomed to. So it's really good to hear, you know, just stopping that at your generation with your own children and moving forward, because it is a conscious effort. And it's different if you have not experienced it yourself.
Yeah, I think you're talking about mental health. I think the mentality we have in the Caribbean, and you look at the mental health in the Caribbean for that, is it might have come from colonialism. It might have came from the enslavement of us, because I had one time I had to sit down. I said to myself, what is the difference between colonialism and segregation? And then I started thinking to myself, in segregation, because I was born in the Caribbean and I grew up here, in segregation, when I lived in the South, I realized African Americans saw what they could not have. They saw they couldn't go into the front of the store. They saw they couldn't drink from this fountain. They saw they couldn't ride at the front of the bus. In the Caribbean, colonialism did not show that to us, because in the Caribbean, the owners or the so-called masters lived in Europe, and we lived in the Caribbean. So growing up in the Caribbean, I saw Black police officers. I saw Black firemen. I saw all these Black so-called professionals. So I said it's like in the Caribbean, we were in the backyard, enclosed in the backyard, and we had the whole yard to run in. In segregation, you were in the cage and you couldn't run in the backyard. And I said to myself, that must have had an impact, and the mentality to hold on to your children up here was tighter than in the Caribbean, because in the Caribbean, we could run around the backyard, we could go across the street, we could go downtown and stuff like that, and not fear that we were doing the wrong thing because of the color of our skin. Up here, you had that. So the mental anguish that African Americans went through and the mental anguish that Caribbean people went through was on a different level. And I think we in the Caribbean took it in a different way. So yeah, something wrong with you, boy? Get a plate of food. You something, man, go get yourself some mangoes off the tree and behave yourself, right? So we spoke in a different way, and I think the impact of that colonialism to segregation had a lot to do on our mental worth and how we saw ourselves.
Interesting. I don't know if you talked about this while I was away, but I was thinking about when I taught in Ghana for a couple of months and teaching people about mental health services and how, and this was just in 2019, where this was still not common practice. People didn't know what therapy was, how they looked at therapy. And Dr. James, I know you had the opportunity to do some work in Africa. Did any of your work consist of your mental health work, and where people were with that while you were there?
Yeah, I was fortunate to go to South Africa last year, and looking forward to opportunities to go back and to visit other African countries. And I was able to do a TV show in Cape Town, the Expresso show, where it was talking about anxiety, and that was on like their daytime TV, and so on some level, that was there. But I think to the same point, right? The thought of like, how open and receptive to talk about anxiety or the stress and what that does and how that comes out. I think that's still there, right? And I think like not only there, but in lots of our communities. And what happens when you maybe are of means, or if you are a second generation where maybe your parents didn't have money, but now you have a job, and how do you deal with some of that survivor's guilt, remorse, like along the way? And so I think that there's an openness to it. I don't know, and this is just not knowing fully, but how much it's being talked about and integrated. But I think there's a readiness for it.
Dr. Ramontal, I know you, with your medical tourism, we're talking about people going around the world and receiving different type of services. When we're talking about mental health, what are some recommendations or some thoughts that you have around that with people receiving those mental health needs while traveling?
Yeah, so that is really individual based on the country. And it's so interesting because it's a tough topic when people ask me, oh, where's the best place to go for a couple different things? Mental health is one of them, and cancer is another. And that is simply because the treatment is different. The so many types of conditions that fall under the umbrella of mental health or fall under the umbrella of cancer, those kinds of things, they're different. And it is stigmatized globally. You may have pockets where it is, people are open about talking about these things, where maybe someone was educated either abroad and came back, decided to start a community group of some sort where they talk about these things. So when it comes to mental health, but what I have found that was really interesting that I don't really find in the US is that where you do find that it's discussed or included in maternal care,
Yeah.
it is seen as comprehensive. So they're not just looking at the physical of the mom, the physical of the baby, the unborn baby. What they're looking at is this person on the whole, and they make sure that they are aware that there
Mhm.
are services available to them for that. And it's inclusive of mental health. I mean, the
Mhm.
US has the highest infant mortality rate and the highest maternal mortality rates in developed countries.
Mhm.
US Black women are 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy related causes than their white counterparts, and that's nationwide. And
Wow.
here you have some regions that have even bigger disparities. In Chicago, the rate of Black women is almost 6 times the rate of white women, and in New York, it's 9 times.
Wow.
So
Wow.
the fact that it's not really at the forefront of
Mhm.
the conversation is really something to look at and take heed,
Yeah.
and know that there are options
Yeah.
outside of the US. The US media will have you thinking that this is the best healthcare, on earth, but there's a lot of really good healthcare outside of the US, and the fact that there is this developed country that has such deplorable rates with maternal health on a whole, but specifically for Black women, is
Mhm.
really telling. And what the US will lead you to believe is that the disparities in pregnant Black women is because of economics,
Mhm.
or lack of access to affordable health care. Either you're underinsured or you're uninsured. And
Mhm.
I've interviewed prominent young Black female OBGYNs. One the other day, she was 20 years in her 20s, and she said her chances of a healthy pregnancy in the US were less than a poor white woman.
Mm.
Okay, this is the OBGYN. So I'm always going to tell everyone the truth. Access issues do exist, but
Mhm.
they're a small part of the problem. And there are multiple factors that contribute to these disparities. And their causes are bigger societal problems, like
Mhm.
variation in quality of healthcare, failing hospitals, or even no hospitals at all. We have a lot of
Mhm.
deserts, hospital deserts around the country
Mhm.
now,
Mhm.
specifically in the South, where a lot of in a lot of either rural or inner city
Mhm.
locations where they're predominantly Black.
Mhm.
And then you also have things like, yes, underlying chronic conditions, but then you also have doctors and nurses who dismiss Black women's pain. And
Mhm.
that's a result of the structural racism and implicit
Yeah.
bias by
Yeah.
clinicians.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said about why you should exercise your other options if you do not feel heard, or if you feel like you can't advocate for yourself or don't have someone advocating for you, because these are a number of issues. But what works best for you to have the most healthy pregnancy is
Mhm.
really what, and delivery is
Mhm.
what's important.
And so, before I tell you of another resource, Dr. Ramontal, how can people get in contact with you? Because will you drop some serious numbers and some knowledge? And I know people are like, wait a minute, I know somebody who needs to talk to her. How do they get a hold of you?
Predominantly my YouTube page. I have a lot of information that's shared there on any aspect of medical tourism, not only on maternity, on anything. If you're going to travel, I want to make sure that you arm yourself with as much information so that you have hopefully the best outcomes and experience. So on YouTube, I'm Medical Tourism RN 812, and on all platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, all of them, I'm Medical Tourism RN.
Yes, please make sure you follow her on all platforms. You can also watch past shows on my Ask Dr. Walls 525. If you go on the Sisters for Harmony playlist, you will see her. I'm putting another resource in the chat, which is Wellness from the Womb. I am biased. This is my cousin. So she is a doula and she is also a master's level clinician. And she started her program because she felt as though if she could address mental health issues early on, then therefore it would create a healthier home environment. And so being able to work with the parents around maternity, maternal mental health, also looking at things like what are some traumas that you need to be mindful of that could take place in while going through the delivery process. knowing what your rights are, feeling empowered, making sure that you are advocating for yourself, making sure you have someone who can advocate for you when you are too much in distress about what is going on, knowing what your rights should be. This is something that she works with clients around, again, with the goal of having a healthy home environment for everyone involved. The couples, Dr. James talks about he and his wife doing programming for couples nights and making sure that that's there as well, because we know when children get into the mix, that whole dynamic shifts. It's a little bit more challenging. Dr. James, what are some thoughts that you're having as we're nearing the closing of time?
No, I just think this is great. Dr. Ramontal, I think that what you're sharing, like I said, is familiar as my wife is in public health, and a lot of these thoughts that you're sharing, I've heard, and it's impacted my work. I say a lot of times when I first started, I used to say work with people who are dealing with infidelity, and I would help them in terms of like dealing with repair and trust and talking about the situation, all the clinical stuff, but I didn't ask, did you use a condom? And I think like,
Mhm.
having someone from a public health background helped
Mhm.
me to just start to ask some real questions, because not only do you need to repair, but if you didn't use a condom, there's a whole nother set of questions we really
That's
need to
right.
talk about.
Yeah.
And I think the integration of health, public health, and mental health is so significant, especially when it comes to people of color, and the so many ways that we're not treated fairly or equally. And
Mhm.
so I really appreciate what you've shared, and it aligns with my thought and my experience. And just props to you and all that you're doing.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Likewise. Thank you so much. And big up next another
Yeah,
Jamaican.
yeah,
Like
man.
That's
always.
right.
Respect.
So, Dr. James, so tell people about how they can participate in some of the events that you're doing, what upcoming engagements, where can people see you, get a hold of you?
Yeah, thank you so much. The best way to find out more about what I'm doing, you can go to my website is georgetalks.com, TALKS. You can also use that same to find me on Instagram and X. My handle is at George Talks. We just finished the date night event and the mother daughter event, but there will be more coming up. I would love to be able to just be of impact to people. And just today I was in New York doing some media stuff, and now here on this podcast, and so just excited just to be able to provide information in ways that is helpful for people. Last thing I say is like I really enjoy the executive coaching I'm doing. So people out
Mhm.
there, if you're in need of support, if there's a line item at your company that where you could use some help or support, hit me up.
Definitely hit him up. He's good. Good. We had the opportunity to meet several years ago, and just dynamic. You know how you look at people and you like, do you see all that I see in you?
No, that's why you need somebody on the outside.
That's right. And he will tell you real talk. We were in there with somebody. I asked everybody to leave the room. I
That's
said,
right.
I need to talk to you because I need to tell you what I'm seeing when I look at you.
No, no, that wasn't even that. It was like, I have a word for you.
This
Those moments you're like, okay, I'm ready. What's about to be said.
and people listening are like, "Yep, that's just how she get us." It's like they done got. And so to watch him flourish and be all that he is becoming, because he's not finished unfolding, y'all. So it is exciting to watch him. It is wonderful to know him. And I'm so glad that you were able to join us today, because I knew you were traveling. And just the sheer fact that you would squeeze us in, we really appreciate you taking the time to do that for us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Brother Emoji. Ruby said it is, somebody on Instagram said it's all love. They done got the word spoken to them too, Dr. James. So they know. Ruby said it's raining in Maryland, so the internet keeps kicking her out, unfortunately. Brother Moja, any final words that you have to say for this evening?
Now, I I just want to tell people, take the time, check out our guest, Dr. George James, and check out Dr. Ramontal. Yeah, the information they putting out there is very important. Sisters for Harmony is bringing people on this broadcast so that we could empower ourselves, because a lot of this information is needed in our community. And if it's not for you, please save it, because it's someone needs it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
pass it on.
Mm-hmm.
We always say pass the links on, pass it on, because you might say, this is not for me. That we're cool with that, but
Mm-hmm.
save it and pass it on to somebody else, because you're just you're the funnel that's getting it to other people. Remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So for those who are listening, please be sure. Oh, Dr. James, your wife, she has books. What are the books that she has?
Uh, yeah, she wrote a children's book a few years ago called Reflections of Me. It's an amazing book for just young folks, with the character of a young Black girl as the main character. So if you just put Reflections of Me and Candace, her first name, it'll pop up on both Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
Fantastic. All right. So, and Dr. Ramontal, we know as of last show, you'll be working on the book, right?
Yes, I was
There,
recruited.
there, there
Okay.
she go.
I was recruited.
I need everybody
Yes,
to get off this
I was
podcast
doing
so I can
homework.
copy.
I was doing homework. But in the meantime, until it comes, I did
Yes.
drop in the chat
Uh-huh.
safest countries for Black women to have a baby, and also top 14 countries for IVF, if anyone's interested. And I find that those two things are what I'm asked about the most.
Fantastic. Fantastic. All right, y'all. So make sure you got to come over to the YouTube side of life. Come over to Ask Dr. Walls 525. Please be sure to subscribe. Always new shows are coming up. Thank you so much for putting all that information in chat. Please be sure to follow our guests. It does not take a lot just to click a follow, a like, a subscribe. All right. We need the numbers. We need the subscribers. We need the likes. It is all a benefit in the work that we're doing. The more that you engage with us, the more we can engage with you, the more our work can get out there and help make the world a better place. So be sure to do that. Also, there will be additional upcoming shows. So, as always, if you hit the subscribe button, you will get the notifications. And I have my Adventures of Froggy T and Bunny. The new book will be dropping in the next couple of weeks, so be on the lookout for that. I'll have to do a special show. That's right, Brother Emoji, you know it. And also be sure to subscribe to UCCN TV on YouTube. That is where Brother Emoji and I do our web series, Kadaga, which is about women warriors of color and their desire and work to eliminate human trafficking in all of its forms. It is a drama series, and yours truly is the lead actress known as Lioness. So, all right. So be sure to check us out. And until we meet again, as always, God bless and continue to live your greatest life. See you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you.